Hi, this is Braschek, and today we're going to be talking with someone who is expert in something that we all need to know about, especially if we want to change our world for the better. It seems that changing the world for the better is a simple matter. You get the facts, you come up with a plan that benefits your community or your society or humanity at large, and you present those facts, and people of goodwill who are able will join you, and off you go, and good things happen. And that almost works, except for something that very, very, very few people are aware of. And this is, we're going to use shorthand here, the phenomenon of Astroturf. And we have an expert today, and she's both a book expert in the sense that she's well informed about this from a broad perspective, but she's also a practical expert in that she has dealt with the Astroturf phenomenon on a very high level against an extremely formidable opponent, and came out on top, which doesn't happen very often. And why this particular body of knowledge is so rare in our society, I don't know, but it's one of my missions and one of our guests' missions to make the concept of Astroturf better known so that we can A, identify it, and B, counteract it. Because as you're going to see when we get into this story, we can't make progress unless we know who, frankly, our enemies are and how they're working and working against humanity. That's really what it boils down to. So welcome, Sandy Rosenthal of levees.org.
Thank you so much, Ken. That was a very good introduction to the challenge that we face. Very good.
Great. I'm going to introduce Sandy a little bit more. As everybody remembers, unless you're young, if you're a teenager, you won't know this or won't be familiar with it. But in 2005, there was a catastrophic flood of the great city of New Orleans, and when I say catastrophic, I mean $100 billion in damage, every conceivable infrastructure either destroyed or seriously damaged, hundreds of thousands of people losing their homes. I mean, just one of the greatest disasters that's ever occurred in American history, possibly the biggest. And we were told at the time that it was occurring that this was an act of God and that Katrina did it. And it was something that just couldn't be helped. And that didn't ring true to me, and it didn't ring true to our guest. And she did some inquiries and found out that, lo and behold, this was not a natural disaster. This was a civil engineering disaster, the biggest one in human history, second only possibly to Chernobyl. And that the organization responsible for what happened was doing everything they could, spending money, spending time, spending personnel to deceive the public through the news media that, oh, this was just something that we all should not pay too close attention to. And by the way, anybody that does pay attention to it is a bit of a nut, and they're conspiracy theorists. Just move on, just move on. But Sandy did not just move on. She rallied first the people of New Orleans, and then people of goodwill throughout the country, and built a positive army of people who insisted that the truth first be found out, which took a lot of work, and that the truth be told. And we're now at a place where, amazingly, otherwise challenged, in my opinion, news media operations like the New York Times, like CNN, like Fox, like the BBC, actually now tell the truth about what happened in New Orleans. But this did not happen easily. This was an incalculable amount of human effort to turn the tide on this. But what we're going to talk about is not that work, but the work of people that were aligned against Sandy to try, and they failed, and that's the good news, to try to prevent Sandy from A, doing the research, because she didn't propose to have the answers. She just wanted serious research done, and they wanted to interfere with her efforts in that. And when she got research results, they wanted to interfere with her publication of that information. So, long introduction, but Sandy, what is Astroturf, and how did it impact your efforts to do this important work in New Orleans?
Astroturf is a remarkably under-examined, under-analyzed phenomenon that's going on in our country every day. I'm not sure I understand why the media does not discuss it. If you were to Google Astroturf, you would have a hard time finding many stories about it in America. You will find it discussed in Australia and in Europe, but not here. And for reasons I don't know, I can go out on a limb and make conjectures about that, and I will later in this interview when we get to that point. But it is a phenomenon that's going around us every day. And basically it's this phenomenon where companies, large companies with money or people, very wealthy people, will hire a public relations firm, and these firms have a business of creating fake grassroots groups. They're not real. When you think of grassroots, you normally think of people getting together and getting mad about something and doing something about it, and that's what comes to mind. And that's the real McCoy, I like to say, true grassroots group. But these PR companies actually go out and look for people that they think might sympathize with their client and mobilize them. And it's going on all around us every day. They justify this work by saying, well, we didn't make the people speak out. We're not forcing them to say this. We're giving them something they believe in, and they justify it that way. And one of the reasons this is going on behind the curtain is they're not qualified in any way to disclose that they're being paid to create these groups. There's no law requiring them to do so, and they justify this lack of transparency with, well, they're volunteers, they're not paid. So again, it's going on every day. I'm very grateful for a book that recently written by a professor at University of California in Los Angeles, and it's a dry textbook, but I'm very grateful to him because what Professor Edward Walker has done is meticulous research and interviews to come up with these observations I just spoke about. It turns up that 40% of the Fortune 500 companies use these clients, these public relations firms, and.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Please go ahead.
Okay. And then so he goes on to say that this strategy of funding fake grassroots groups without disclosure turns out to be age-old, but it has exploded in the 60s and 70s, and it's everywhere, all around us. And his final observations are that these campaigns can falsely appear to represent the public when, in fact, they're representing a public that's probably already overrepresented. In other words, minorities and the dispossessed are left out, which is one of the observations he draws. Basically, I'm grateful to Walker because he didn't go out on a limb and make wild jump to conclusions. He just gave us the facts, just the facts, Jack, and it's a very powerful thing. He in the end of the day, he says that not only are the minorities left out, but the phenomenon, he says repeatedly in his book, is under-investigated, under-examined, and under-analyzed. The one good thing he says is that critical observers, just by asking questions, can expose this bad behavior. And when it is exposed, it's considered abhorrent. There's nobody that will agree that it's okay to pay people to have an opinion without it being disclosed.
Let's put this in concrete terms. I'm going to suggest another case that I'm very familiar with, literally concrete terms. A very large cement company, at the time the second largest in the world, now the largest, proposed to build a cement plant on the banks of the Hudson River. And cement making is a very dirty business. It's right up there with oil refining and chemical plants. And typically you locate cement plants away from centers of population. Well, this company thought it was in their financial interest to put it right next to a little city, a city with schools and hospitals, and a city dependent on tourism and agriculture, and of course having a massive industrial installation in such a place would have wiped out all kinds of people. So the company managed at great expense to buy support for itself. So, for example, when there was a public meeting to discuss the advisability of having this cement plant right in town without any kind of filters on the smokestacks, the company didn't want to have any. The company's PR firm just went out and literally hired a bunch of people to wear T-shirts and come to the public hearing and take all the seats and create the illusion that everybody in town wanted to be poisoned by the arsenic, lead, and mercury that comes out of cement plants. So this is a concrete example of something that Sandy is talking about. Now, you came across a very similar ploy used in New Orleans recently.
Yes, very, very recently, as recently as last Friday, a judge ruled, a civil district court judge ruled that a power company here in New Orleans called Entergy had hired paid actors to do something very similar to the cement company, to wear T-shirts and take up seats in city council chambers where a vote was taken to build a new power plant. And the judge ruled the city council had to vote again because of this. So this was a big win for the true grassroots groups that were opposed to this new power plant. And the result is devastating to Entergy, because now, because of the basically dirty little tricks that they pulled, the issue of whether the power plant is good or bad is obscured. That becomes a secondary conversation, and that this tarnishing of their image is now in the forefront. Even if you didn't really care about the new power plant, you do now. Because of the shenanigans that was exposed. And the beauty of it is it wasn't exposed with a lot of money. It wasn't exposed by hiring a private investigator. It became exposed literally because one of the paid actors was just feeling terrible about it and started talking about it, and that's how the whole house of cards fell down.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It is interesting. So the good news is this is going on all around us, but we don't have to sit back and go, oh, I guess there's nothing I can do. If something looks too good to be true or too big to be true, it probably isn't. And all you have to do is start asking questions. And so there is a positive outcome of this. Just ask. Don't be afraid. A lot of these organizations are nonprofits where they're not required to divulge where they got their money, but you can still ask. And if they refuse to answer, you might be onto something.
Yeah, so one red light would be a group that appears out of nowhere and is huge.
And it's huge, right?
Without any natural evolution. If suddenly you woke up and there was a tree in your front yard, you would know that somebody put it there. It didn't grow there naturally.
Right. Now, and so we can talk about this for just a moment. If it's that simple, how come the curtain isn't pulled back? And part of the reason is often these campaigns that are created by a PR consultant are short. All they need is a city council vote or a vote of a legislature, and then the vote comes through, and the PR consultant pulls back, and this big group just sort of vanishes into thin air. And that's one of the reasons it's not exposed. So you have to ask questions right away from the beginning. You can't sit and think about it and then a year later try to do something. Another reason it's going on everywhere and is underreported is often the media is already co-opted. And it's my understanding that with the cement company, the media was co-opted. Do I have that right?
100%. There wasn't a single reporter or news outlet that would say anything bad. In fact, it became you were putting yourself at risk even to talk against the cement plant in town initially. because
Yes.
they had created such a blanket, I called it carpet bombing.
Yes. Yes, and in my book I discuss this phenomenon where the media is co-opted, and I believe you wanted me to talk a little bit more about my own personal experience, which I'm going to do at this time, if that's all right.
Yeah, and I think you raised a really interesting point. I just want to highlight it for a second.
Yes.
It's something I had never really thought through before until you just mentioned it. It is a two-pronged attack. They co-opt the news media on the one hand while simultaneously creating the fake grassroots Astroturf group on the other hand, and then they feed the Astroturf, I'm going to call it rantings and ravings, to the news media, and then the news media takes up that ranting and raving and says, see, look at all these people. They're up in arms. We're just being good journalists by reporting what they say.
Yes. And so in my book, I discuss this in detail. The book, Words Whispered in Water, how me and my organization uncovered the Army Corps of Engineers' plan to fool the American public about the flooding of New Orleans. And right from the get-go, the Army Corps of Engineers enlisted the support of big media and local media in their plans, and to fool the American public into believing that there was no way the force of Hurricane Katrina could have been foreseen, when in fact the truth was the Army Corps had misdesigned their levees, and they should have held up. It should have been just another moderate hurricane in history, and we shouldn't even really be talking about it right now. But what happened, I'll give you a teaser, is the Army Corps of Engineers had hired a team of people to attack me and my group in the media in the form of leaving really derogatory and nasty comments on news stories. Keep in mind, this is 2008, where the phenomenon of leaving anonymous comments was accepted, brand new and accepted at that time. It's difficult to do now. You have to identify yourself online now, but at that time it was anonymous, and they were coming in by the hundreds every day. Well, I, using back-end tools available to any amateur blogger, was able to see, using IP addresses, that these comments were coming from Army Corps of Engineers headquarters in bright red letters. Keep in mind, this is 2008. It was an unsophisticated time. So I took this information to a local TV station and gave them an exclusive. The story came out, and then what I wanted to do with this newfound information is go to one of the local newspapers and say, I'd like to see the comments. I don't care who the identity of the people who made the comments. I just want to see how many are coming from Corps headquarters, which they could have produced with a click of a mouse.
Yep, easy peasy.
Easy peasy could have been done. And I discuss it in my book in much more detail, but not only did the local newspaper refuse, the local newspaper attacked me and made me out to be a villain for my crime of asking that question.
Wow.
For my crime,
for the crime of asking the question of where all these people, unidentified people, came from who were suddenly attacking you. You weren't even allowed to ask the question.
No, can't even ask the question, and was held up and tarred and feathered for doing so by this newspaper. Well, I have a lot more information, it was in my book on how a lot more back, details about that, interviews with people who were involved at that time. But it's going on every day. But again, you just can't be afraid. And before this interview closes, I do have some positive, happy news to share on if you are a grassroots group trying to make the world a better place. There are ways to protect yourself, which I'll be sure to share before this interview is over.
Great. Let's get to that. But before we do, I want to just recap something. So
Sure.
it looks like first of all, people should know that there are these companies called public relations companies. They sort of operate in the shadows. They're not as visible as oil companies or high-tech companies or even your local supermarket. But this is a big business. A lot of money is spent on it. And it's called public relations, but what it really should be called is media manipulations.
I agree.
Right? And,
I agree with that.
Right, that's what they really do. So if you've got a big checkbook, you go to one of them, and they do all kinds of things. So for instance, if you want to demonstrate that a country that literally stones people to death and literally crucifies people for reading a religious book differently or having a relationship with another person, if you want to promote that as a great company, Saudi Arabia just goes to usually a Washington, D.C. PR company, writes a huge check, and next thing you know, Saudi Arabia is the most progressive place on earth. They let women drive. How amazing is that? So anything, it is the buying and selling of public opinion. And how do these companies do it? Well, they know how to spread money around. They have connections with all the different news outlets, relationships, and they just show up and say, hey, guys, we need to make Saudi Arabia look good. Here's the plan. So that's part one. Part two is another department at the PR firm organizes their fake group. So now there'll be people, just to take our example further, there'll now be suddenly regular Joe Americans who think Saudi Arabia is just great. I drive a truck and I live in Iowa, but by golly, I love the Saudi Arabian princes and how they run their country, and I'm going to post all over the internet and and I'm even going to join an organization, Americans for the Saudi Arabian Princes, because I don't know, I just feel it's the right thing to do, right? So they create that silly group. They appoint some leaders who are in their pocket, and then they take that group to the news media. The news media says, oh, look, it's the truck drivers of Iowa for Saudi Arabian princes. What a wonderful grassroots organization. Let's interview this expert on Saudi Arabia. He's only driven a truck his whole life, has never been to Saudi Arabia, can't speak Arabic, knows nothing of history, but we're going to treat this guy as if he were the expert on what's going on in Saudi Arabia. And this is actually, guys, how it works. And if you read your news stories carefully, you're going to now see this everywhere. But the third piece is the most sinister, or among the sinister things they do, is they also create a troll army, and this is very important. When you see somebody being attacked and pilloried in the press, step back for a second. Who benefits by this person's message being shouted down? You should always ask that question. Because in addition to creating the media alliances, in addition to creating the fake Astroturf groups, they also create an army of trolls to attack and savage. And it can get really bad. I mean, they can show up at your place of work. They can post complete slanderous things about you that never happened and have nothing to do with anything. It can get absolutely unhinged. And it does, and it's all part of a single mechanism. So I've painted the dark side, Sandy. How do legitimate community-based grassroots groups that want to make life better for themselves protect themselves against these kind of forces?
Yeah, I'm happy to share that, and I'm just going to elaborate one tiny bit on what you just said, is that if people, even if people agree with a message, they might not if they knew who was doing the talking and who was paying for it. And so it just basically look behind the curtain. Just look. Just like you said, just look and go, does this make sense? So in closing, I would like to say there is hope for a group just getting started, and the secret is disclose. If you're a grassroots group trying to get started, go ahead and be transparent about if you have any money, where is it coming from, and if you're spending money, where are you spending it? Just disclose it. It sounds simple. It's honesty is the best policy, and if you do that, it will neutralize any attempts that will be made to accuse you of being a front group for some sort of big industry. In my case, I was accused of being a front group for the attorneys who were suing the Army Corps of Engineers. I was accused of it more times than I can count, both in writing and on TV radio shows. And all I had to do to battle that was just be transparent, and not only where the little bit of money I had, where it come from, and the little bit I had, where I spent it, but also people who were providing pro bono services, like Mr. Ken McCarthy, who was helping me with media, like the attorney and the civil engineer who were working with me. I disclosed this on this little website that my son designed, and this neutralizes all these attacks just by being transparent. So there is hope, and I tell you, if I was able to succeed against the most powerful engineering company in the world, anyone can do anything.
Gotcha. So disclosure is a foundation for going forward. May I ask some questions related to that?
Certainly.
Great. But you certainly did a lot more than just disclose in order to counteract these folks. I mean, part of it, I guess, it has to start with awareness of even being aware that these structures and these people and these organizations even exist. Because a lot of people, I mean, I've seen people be victimized by this and think and believe that somehow these trolls are a natural creation. You know, that it's just bad luck and, gosh, a lot of people just hate me, you know, and they don't realize that there's organization behind this. So awareness of the other side, I think, is important. And how do you counteract the other side?
Well, that's a great question. In 2008, when I first discovered that the Army Corps of Engineers were the people behind the negative comments, I didn't even know the word Astroturf. I didn't even I wasn't even aware that such a strategy existed. I only knew what I was observing, but that was 10 years ago. That was a decade ago. That was when the process of these online attacks was still in its infancy and was allowed to go on. Fortunately, now you cannot leave a comment with most places unless you say who you are. You have to use Facebook. You didn't have to say who you are. Even though I now know there's fake Facebook groups. I'm aware of that. But again, just awareness that these groups can be fake, awareness that it's going on, it's alive and well, and at this time it is unregulated because apparently it is not illegal. And so it's under-examined, under-analyzed, and unregulated, certainly at this time, but knowledge is power.
Now, there's a book that you read that I think was really helpful in giving you an understanding of this phenomenon, because it sounds like you, like so many other people who are at the effect of this, aren't aware of where it's coming from. And then there's a book called Toxic Sludge is Good for You, I believe. Yes,
written by John Stauber.
And that's a pretty, if someone wanted to get an easy-to-read background on this, that would be one place to start.
That would be a good start. It's a little bit dated. I've got a copy right here on my credentials, right behind me. Yep, it's one of the books that was very helpful to me because I felt like I lived it as I was reading about it. So this was published originally in 1995, but it's still very, very. The methods are a little bit different, but the strategies are the same. Everything we've discussed today is discussed in this book. And the book by Edward Walker, Grassroots for Hire, is, again, it reads like a textbook, and it is more, very dry and clinical. However, it is also extremely useful because it is dry and clinical. And he does not, he uses neutral language to describe everything, which makes it extremely valuable for people being attacked by these strategies.
Gotcha. And then we're all looking forward to the publication of your book, which is going to document this, one of the biggest stories of the last 20 years in America, the flooding of New Orleans, and it's going to be a behind-the-scenes look at the battle to get the truth about what happened out from somebody that was right in the middle of it, getting that truth out and all the things that you had to confront and overcome.
And persistence is probably the key ingredient. Don't give up.
It's all persistence. In fact, let me see if I can find this quote. Oh, I hope I can. You'll appreciate this, and it's worth looking for. Oh, the person who succeeds does more than is necessary and keeps on doing it.
About what? I think that's well put.
And that's from someone named Curtis Hudson, Hutson, and Mr. Hudson gets credit because he really stated the case very well. And I'm going to repeat it. And this is another message that I'm sure is going to be in your book, and people should take from your example. This is not easy. You really got to roll up your sleeves and fight, and it's often a prolonged fight. The cement plant fight lasted 7 years. Now the benefit is we're not breathing mercury, arsenic, and lead infused dust every have So that 7 years was worth it.
Yes.
And nothing in life is free. So you have to know your values, and you have to know what price you're willing to pay. And we're all very grateful that Sandy was willing to pay an enormous personal price so that we know what really happened in New Orleans. And it's important that we know because many, many, many places are dependent on good engineering provided by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It's not just New Orleans. It's a shockingly large number of people, actually, as people in the Midwest are discovering. Your life can be turned upside down if an engineering project was not managed correctly. So I'll give that quote one more time. The person who succeeds does more than is necessary and keeps on doing it. Thank you for all that you've done, Sandy, and thank you so much for being on the call with us and sharing your experience.
You're very welcome.